No.
So Andrew's going to do a good program today on management. It'll be interesting to see. I mean, I think
Oh, come on.
growing your process, so I think it's going to be beneficial.
Thanks to all of you for coming, and thanks for people who are watching on your laptops or computer screens right now. I'm Andrew Lee, and the topic today is called the Juggling App for Management from Day-to-Day to Long-Term. And this came about because occasionally it's not designed. Weeks where I'm thinking a lot about that stuff. I keep track of everything on my to-do list. You know, how do I keep the number of post-its stuck to my desk and I monitor it to a minimum? How do I not let something about billing where I thought progress schedule?
Oh,
I think a lot about systems, both paper systems and software systems, and experimented with Kanban. Is a program for billing, which kind of patches a lot of the holes, but not all of them. So I'm constantly on the search for like that system that really works for how I goals. I know we all have different goals for our practices, but we enjoy doing that are challenging to us and interesting to us. Spreadsheet. SFF always canvasses the whole committee for topic ideas at the beginning of the year, and I think he snagged me in January, and here we are. So I'm really happy to have Alex German and Ines Lejaraga here to tell us about how they deal with these questions. They're both well known for their design work, and I'm really happy that we'll all be getting insight into how their systems serve their design practices. Reference. Cal and Columbia. She brings the multidisciplinary approach to her work. She creates custom pictures and sculptural installations, and her projects include high-end residential, retail, office, and multifamily housing. And let me just introduce Alex as well, and then maybe you guys can do your presentations. Alex is a graduate of Wesleyan and the architecture program at Yale. If you look at his website, you'll see that he creates beautiful modern homes locally and in Sierra, as well as commercial and institutional work nationwide. He's also taught at Cal on the introductory studio course and has served on juries at Cal and CCA. And if it's okay with you guys, I think it's okay to entertain questions while you're talking. And we'll also have time, we should have time for Q&A discussion at the end. So, I hope, is everybody in Zoom land?
Hopefully we have,
Presumably?
yeah, we had a bit of an audio issue. I think it's fixed now,
Okay.
hopefully.
When people have a question on chat, do we see that or do you see that?
I see that.
You see, okay.
Yeah.
I see there's one balloon up right now.
Yeah, that was from me asking about the audio.
Ah, perfect.
Cool. All right. Who is starting again? Ines?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Okay. You should be able to move those forward now.
So here, this is maybe see a little bit of my artwork. It's maybe when we're talking about people on this side. copies, and here I am. So, yeah, I like to experiment with materials. This, going on its own.
Shouldn't be. Sorry.
I think the NFL screen, maybe with the slideshow.
Yeah, well, normally when I do as slideshow.
So basically here, I experimented with bending wood, so heating the wood to 200 degrees, bending it into various. This knowledge to then, make this project, which was this, shop. It was just for powder room. I almost didn't take it because it's teaching of a project, but I took the attitude. I like to take the attitude, that even small things I can find beautiful. So that project then got me this project, which was their rooftop penthouse edition. Where it did these sliding doors that open up at the corner. So those were my office. Do good work. Which we take. We all have that goal. That's good to, remember that times. Do interesting work, have fun, balance work and life, and then make enough money to support the good work and the life. So then the question is, how do he has this. Start. Says, the morning question, what shall I do this day? Address the power of business, contrive day's business, and take the resolution for the day. Prosecute the current study and breakfast. Then he works for 4 hours, takes a 2-hour lunch, it counts, works for another 4, and then the last 4, he puts things in their place, has supper, music, diversion, conversation, examination of the day. So I won't say that I'm up at 5 in the morning, it's not on purpose. I do, however, try to start the day by comprising the day's business and taking the resolution of the day. So here's my little Excel, or it's a Google Sheet to-do list, which I guess I, like Andrew, also tried all these different apps and stuff, and so on, and had all these like little bits of paper over my desk. And so then I was like, okay, how can I transfer the paper system into the Excel system? So basically what I have at the bottom, but those are the projects across the little blue line. And so God will, those are the names of the projects. And below those is the list is much longer. It's chopped off here. So there's like 50 items or 10 items or 2 items depending on the project. And the two, and there, I try to put them in order of importance. And then the first 2 most important ones are at top, and then that feeds into the top part. So I only, like, when I come in the morning, I look basically at the 2 most important things for every project. I decide which one I'm actually going to try and get done. I put little A's next to them. So you really could only, I mean, at least in my case, I just assign 3 or 4 things in an A. And then I try like hell to get those things done the day. Maybe I get other things done, generally like oftentimes the most important thing is like the thing that I want to do the least. And then I end up doing some of the B's and C's first before getting to the A. But anyway, that's kind of my methods. Working well, it helps things not fall through cracks.
Yes, just for context,
Yeah.
do you have anybody working for you, or have you?
I do have people that are working for the contractors.
Okay.
I'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
So, I also, so this is, Benjamin Franklin says prosecute the present study. So I try to spend, have this ideal of being like Google and spending 20% of my time just studying or doing art or something that might contribute mentally to the projects. It doesn't always work, but I try. So this is during the pandemic. I needed something that just didn't take up any space, so it's like I learned to do this copper leaf stuff. The copper leaf hasn't really made it into the project, but, the little mahogany pieces of wood that was sort of sculptural were sitting on my desk, and it made it into this next project, which was addition and remodel of this building by Mark Mack and then Jensen Macy. So they have these fabulous views, and they wanted this sort of multi-purpose room. It could be mostly for hanging out, but then it also serve as a guest bedroom and bathroom. So then that little bit on the right there was a little sculptural object that was inspired by the mahogany bits that I was working on at the time. And that basically houses a emergency bed, bathroom, and storage in that little.
Inez, would you mind trying to present from up here? I think they're having trouble hearing you from the microphone. Sorry, I
Right.
think that will fix it. So it won't advance. That should be. There we go. Okay, so here's my team at the moment. So basically for the team, the number of people sort of gone up and down over the years. Before the pandemic, I had Mike, who's on the bottom right. Or actually, no, when I was first starting out, the thing is that I didn't have money for additional station at my office. And so basically I developed a system where Mike would come in, I don't know, 2-3 times a week or once a week, depending on the workload. I'd go over, what he was doing, and then he would go home and work. And then, eventually I got enough money to have the additional station. Okay, do you want to come into work? And he said, no. So I was like, all right, fine. I mean, I guess it's working fine as it is. And, I saved the rent on the additional space. So, then when we transferred to the pandemic, we actually were completely smooth transition because all we did was transfer our meetings to the Zoom world. So, then I, during the pandemic, added some people, Kelly on the top left and Cornelia on the bottom left. Kelly was living here at the time, but then she moved to Taiwan. Cornelia is a Bay Area expat, but she lives in New York. So we have these Zoom meetings. They're sort of like standing meetings, and we're sort of all over the world here. And then this is how I do the organization for the team. So basically I have tasks. This is, we're only in, this is the construction administration here. So, it's not a very long list. But, I have the tasks on the right. I assign with little X's on the left. They yellow them off as they complete them. Sometimes I put, if there's more of them, or especially if we're on deadline, I put priorities A, B, C, D. That way they know what order to do them in. And if we hit the deadline and whatever the D's don't get done, it's not the end of the world. So yeah. This is a book that I would recommend. It has a lot of very good ideas and systems for organizing. I don't use all of them, but I think it's worth looking into. Then Harvest. Harvest has sort of been a lifesaver for the last goal of making enough money to support the other items. So it's a time tracker, but it also, allows you to put your billable rates in, and then it will give you alarms. Like here, this one's set to send email alerts if your project gets to 80% of your budget. So for those, and you can make all kinds of reports. So this here, you can see at a glance, a list of projects and how they're doing, are they under budget or not? You can have these, this is when I was first trying it out. I didn't, I'm making more than $18 a year. But just as an example, you could see, a yearly report. These are the timesheets that you input. There's these little timers, you click start, stop. And then your people can all do that too. You can see all your, I think this is like a weekly report, year, and how you spent your time. And then this is a timesheet that it produces. This thing also uses invoices. I myself don't use the invoices directly from here. I download these timesheets and I send those to the bookkeeper. That because I feel like sometimes my billing isn't exactly how Harvest would have me do it. So it's a subscription. I feel like I can't remember exactly. It's like $10 to $15 a month per person. So I mean, for me, it's worth every penny. So that's it. I have time for questions. I don't know if we should both present and then questions at the end, or we questions. I don't know. All right. Okay.
Or do I just point with my hands?
This does. Just that one right there. Yeah, let me set up screen share and then you'll be good to go. I need a portion of screen. It's not working.
I never use PowerPoint, but I did for you.
Okay. That should be good. Let me see if they see. Yes.
Do I just go right and left?
And then, yeah,
That way,
sure.
okay, all right, great.
Should work.
Awesome. So my name is Alex German, and I just want to thank you for inviting all of us here. I think it's a really important discussion and one that I think, as Andrew mentioned, one that we sort of either tackle consciously or subconsciously on a basis, and sometimes we get into crisis mode about it. I think that to start off, one of the things that I try to think about is like thinking of all of these things as a design problem in a way. So I think we're like design thinkers, and when I started the firm, 13 years ago, it's sort of like, oh, I hate invoicing, or I hate doing proposals, or this is like the part of the job I don't like. Sure, those moments come up where there's like, those are less pleasant things to do, but it's like thinking about them within the context of like the whole project and like how to think of it as sort of a design problem that you're trying to solve. I think more engages that part of my mind, that just rather than thinking of it just as like a flat admin type of process. So like I said, I started this firm around 2010. I had gone to school and lived and worked on the East Coast. And a lot of the work I had done before then was sort of a real kind of blend of kind of commercial, institutional, retail, residential, some really large scale and some really small scale. And so when I started the office, it was about kind of trying to take the diversity of that kind of work and trying to institute it in my own little world, and continue that kind of process of like having different project typologies influence others, and like how that kind of intermixing could kind of be a fruitful way of kind of discovering what the work would be. Started off in my house, and slowly kind of grew after about a year to 2 of us, then 3 of us, and we're 5 currently right now. And that's sort of a good size at the moment. So I think we're sort of like, we're a small firm that kind of reaches to do bigger projects, because that's the story I was used to in all the other firms that I worked for. Even if we were 20, we were like doing a much bigger project than we should. So a lot of our work is very, very custom. We're very involved in a lot of the detailing of all our projects and all the construction administration as well. So we're just very hands-on throughout all of design and then all of the execution of it, which we love. But it makes it hard to negotiate fees when you have a lot of time in CA. So see if I kind of, it didn't work, but I'll, there, no, beeping at me.
Now it should work.
So just to highlight some of the projects, the earlier slide was about some of the residential work. We also do a lot of commercial work. This is for a client called Forward, and we've done sort of a boutique medical sort of doctor's office. And so we've done a lot of work for them over the years. In fact, we've done 20 clinics for them in 6 years. So it's kept us really, really busy. And also, again, thinking about how to help them with expansion, right? How are you a small firm and how are you dealing with this kind of multi-variables of all these things? But also when you have a client that has to try to expand and they're a startup, how do you help them think about kind of thinking across all these different platforms at the same time? Oh, geez, did it again. Hold on, let me see if I can just do it here. I don't know, can I go in full screen somehow? Is that possible?
It's full screen for people.
Oh, what they can see, but I guess for some
It's
reason
just
I
in
can't.
the room.
I can't advance the slides, unfortunately.
Not my day.
Oh, I can just do it this
Yeah,
way. I'll just do it that way. That's cool.
Sorry.
So here you just see a few more of kind of like the variety of details and kinds of alignments and sort of experimental things that this is a project for the Edible Schoolyard in Berkeley for their outdoor classroom that we completed a couple of years ago. And this is a house for a client who didn't really want any furniture. He wanted a kind of an art gallery for his space. And so what ended up being kind of a very clean envelope for him evolved into how do we make this kind of into a gallery for his own use and sort of like helping to select the oak slabs and so on. Let's see. You know, I missed something that I was going to sort of get to, and I'm going to go back one. Okay, so there's 3 primary goals that I wanted to talk about, and all firms are dealing with this. One is securing the work. The second is managing the work, and then the third is managing the firm. Deborah Burke told me this once, and I've never forgotten it. She's a fantastic architect, and some of my really close friends from school work for her. And she said, you know, you can only do 2 out of those. You can't do 3. You can't do all 3 well. And I thought about that for like a decade, and like I keep coming up against it. I'm like, yeah, I'm not doing it well. So what do you do when you're 1 person or 3 people or 5 people? I think that's the big question we're all asking ourselves. How do we do the job of more than 1 person can handle? And I think, you know, what I'm going to try to address today is like, how can we use, you know, either certain software or certain techniques or certain systems to help us with that? We can't obviously achieve perfection, but how do we sort of do that? And then how do we kind of think about all 3 of those primary goals and running a practice at the same time, which is what's kind of key. So securing the work, right? That's the business development. Like, how do you evaluate and track future work? How do you identify, like, what's your network of people? What are you trying to do? Like, who gives you work? How can you get work? You know, is it all client referrals? Is it through contractors? Is it through realtors? And who's right? You know, like if you got to sort of evaluate, like, oh, I keep getting all these jobs from realtors, but they're all really crappy jobs, you know, or like they're just, right? They're just like, I did these fast things, like you were saying, what's the good work, right? So I think you constantly have to ask yourself, what is good for me? That's not always easy because you're trying to juggle what's the most profitable and so on. But I think it's important to really say to yourself, like, what is it that we're trying to do? It may not be the total end game for our office, but like right now, what's important for us to build? And then how do you consistently try to grow the network, right? That's the thing. It's like this kind of organic thing that has to keep going. And you can't be like, oh, great, I landed this big job, I'm good to go, you know? Like that job can go on pause, you know? That client might get pissed off at you, whatever. Like you may not get the kind of like snowball effect that you're looking for. So this is Smartsheet that we use a lot. We started using this predominantly. One, you know, a lot of the people we hire have worked in a variety of different firms. And I'm looking over at Hans because he's worked at one of those firms where some of the people work for us. So I think we've all struggled, especially when you're dealing with like fast-paced commercial work. How do you manage not only all the spreadsheets that you need, but how do you share them and keep them live, right? How many people are sick of being like, here's the updated schedule in Microsoft Excel? You know, it's like, no. Let's have it all live so the client can see it schedule-wise or budget-wise. So Smartsheets is basically kind of an Excel that is able to be simpler. There's just a lot less kind of fussing around. They kind of dumbed it down enough. So you're not like, oh, what's the color of this cell? Do I need a border around this? I can't tell you how many times I've kind of like got obsessed about making it look good. And so I think, and because that's who we are, right? Like, would you be surprised if someone tracked like your fidgeting time on a presentation when it's like admin work. It's like, can't get this invoice if it looks like that. So what they've done is they've got different platforms to view this. This is the card view, right? So this is the card view. You can kind of move things around. And I find this to be really intuitive because you can create a column that, you can create all, okay, it doesn't work with the TV, but you can create columns for like what's completed, move things around. You can create columns for people, right, in your office, columns for consultants, general contractor, and so on. And so this is a way of kind of visually kind of seeing things. So like I've got contractors, owners, representatives, realtors. I've color coded like the people I need to sort of talk to. So what it helps me do is see something in its totality and be able to kind of visually kind of identify, oh yeah, the red stuff, I didn't talk to that person last week. Because I've found that when I've put specific dates for things, I don't always succeed in achieving them. But if I have kind of a group or like a range, it's like, okay, I need to get this done in 2 to 3 days. It's a little more successful. And I kind of slide this along and say, you know what, can't go past this day. Like I've got to finish it, right? For whatever reason. But this kind of stuff flows, right? It's like, you don't have a deadline to talk to that contractor about maybe getting the new job, right? So you've got to be able to kind of track that stuff in the background. It's not in your active mind, but it's kind of going, there, and you're like checking in on it. You're like, you know what? Now it's time to kind of hit up on these guys that are in the red and just sort of see what happens. And boom, once you do that, they might be like, oh, great that you just did that. Client just said they were looking for, to do an addition. And I just thought of you as you email. So, but the important thing is to always evaluate who are these people, and what's important to you, and kind of take that time to kind of work through that. Lost myself in this presentation. There we go. Is that working? Okay. This is part of like how we developed a spreadsheet for project type evaluation. We struggled in a sense because we started getting a ton of work from one client and another client, and we were doing it all of a sudden. We were doing 95% medical. We took on a rural health clinic in Willits in 2014 because I really wanted to get into medical work, even though we haven't done very much. We did this 16,000 square foot project. It was really exciting, and I'm really glad we did, because then we got a really great job in the medical realm. Because when you start your office during their session, you never stop thinking about how hard it is to run an office. So, but we got to a point where we're like, we're doing the same thing over and over again, and we're really our core design firm. So we kind of sat down and we began to think about ways to evaluate projects. Like, are they easy to build? Are they easy or hard to go through planning? Are we getting burned on fees because a residential client only has so much money in their budget and they want a really complex project that requires a long design review process? Like, does that benefit us? Is that what we want? And so, we periodically go through this to kind of evaluate the project type so we can begin to decide, hey, what things begin to kind of get into the highlighted 27s, for us based on this different criteria. And it's really about setting up systems to kind of objectify it, because on any given day, you might be like, I hate residential projects because the clients are just, or, commercial projects are too fast. So I think it's important to kind of objectify these so you can kind of like get different staff, like we had different staff members evaluate them. And then we looked at it and we said, okay, what does everybody want to do? What do we think makes sense? And how do you guys think about it? So it becomes more objective.
Can I ask about that?
Mm-hmm.
Do you your numbers actually turn out to be correct, or?
We have not yet, but we should. And I think that's really kind of the next step. I mean, both even in completing projects, that kind of evaluation, I think, is really important. But what I'm finding in a small firm is, the time is limited to achieve that. But I think it's really, really important to have that kind of post. Like, how is it kind of working?
Yeah.
So I think we all kind of can intuit what we think works, but sometimes the numbers actually say something a little different. Yeah. And I think that's important. Yeah.
Okay, read everything. Can we just go across the columns and something like?
Yeah, so the top one is architectural expression on the left. So that's sort of like, is this architecture or is it just like a project, right? And architecture. AJA's experience in the type. So like, how much have we done of it? How experienced are we in it? What's the potential for profitability? What is the ease in planning review? How complex and what's the duration of that? Ease in the building plan check review. So like, how technical or difficult is that project? You know, if you're doing we did an OSHPOD 3 rural health clinic. That's a hell of a lot more challenging than a single family residential where you're not doing an addition or something. Reasonable pace of work. So this is kind of gets back to like the day-to-day and managing it. How crazy is it? How fast is it? How challenging is it? Versus like, hey, this is kind of going along and we can kind of do our thing and manage it and so on, as opposed to feeling like it's a fire drill every 3 days because you're getting pushed up against it. And I think that's an important one to ask yourself when you're taking on a client, right? It's like, you know, budget, schedule, client. It's like something that's virtually impossible, and you kind of always have to go back. Repeat business potential is the last one. So, you know, if we're going to invest the time in this project, like, what is the return? You know, is it a network of friends that these people are going to be, or is this like, you know, sometimes we'll put inside if we really feel like there's a benefit downstream.
Are there certain jurisdictions that feel prohibitive to work in because of the building department and the complications and?
Berkeley? It's funny, everyone asks me like, oh, how many projects have you done in Berkeley? And I'm like, well, we've done, which was an interesting project. And then we've done the stuff at the Edible Schoolyard, and like, that's it. And it's like, that wasn't by planning by any means, but I think there are some places where we do really put a red flag next to it. You know, for example, we're doing a project in Orinda. You drive over to the planning department, you can get planning approval same day. Right? It's like, they're like, oh, cool, that's fine. You guys are doing this with the windows and so on. Great. You know, that's not the case in San Francisco. You know, it's like just the process is very different. So we always do a little bit of work up front when we're doing proposals to kind of get a sense of like what for clients like Forward, where we're doing stuff all over the country. We developed, you know, relationships with an architect of this to sort of set up how do we take the heat off of ourselves. Expertise of certain detail with construction, but we do, you know, include construction administration in that. Well, because it's an evolving organism, the schedule, right? And I think we find it to be really helpful to be able to send this link to a client. So if they're savvy, and a lot of people are tech savvy, that they can sort of just look at it on their computer. They don't, you know, they don't always have a good file system for all the emails you send them with all the attachments. It's like, they just, you know, they can't deal with it, right? They don't have to be able to kind of help them manage it. And it also really helps with the contractors too, to kind of like just let them know what's going on and try to keep things on it. So we use this just as just a constant reminder. It's like we're always checking in on this every couple of days and kind of being like, hey, where are we based on where we want to be in schematic design right now? What are we?
Now, do you ever feel like it like keeping that updated becomes more of a time suck than you want it to be?
No, because it's easy. Schedules and, you know, coloring all the bars and all this sort of stuff. You can just, and it takes a really short amount of time. And we're trying to kind of just dial in things like client meetings and that sort of thing, that we kind of milestones that we want to implement into this. So now that sort of also falls into place with how much fee we're making. So we try to kind of build this all together, and yeah, it lags for a while. You're not constantly like updating it every day, but like just for this other client up in the mountains that we're working for, it's just like, oh great, can you update the schedule? And we've got a contractor who we've worked with before, and he's great, but he's not a paper guy. And so he doesn't mind if we have this schedule and that we remind him that like we have to close up that house before the first 4-foot dumping of snow. You know, like it just keeps everybody on the same page at least. And so it's been really, really helpful as a communicating tool as well as like an internal.
How much time do you? And it was, I feel like mine was maybe it was tuned in and like
Yep.
scripted things or
Yeah.
whatever, and you know, I just like.
So we, at one point, we really got into software called Asana, and we had a client who was a tech client who was big into Asana. And then they started doing a Gantt chart that's linked to Asana. So that way you have like these tasks and it links to a Gantt chart. We tried it, drove me bonkers. So I think there's like, I think one of the things that we should talk about today is kind of like the sort of the BIM side of management, right? So if like the challenge of a BIM model is that you get kind of embedded in sort of the complexity and can't do this without doing this. And it sometimes binds you. And the same can happen in your management, right? If you're too interconnected in some ways, it can be external to whatever the core things you're working on. So we abandoned that whole Asana. It like conceptually sounded great, but I was doing the same thing, like managing too much on the day-to-day and so on. And so what we found was we'll probably get into this once a month to kind of update it, because it's not a daily thing, because that's not the purpose. The purpose is more to be like, where are we overall? And stones. And then we have some really, scrutinizing clients who are like, when are we going in for planning? And what do you think it's going to be? And we have to say, well, this is what we think it's going to be, but hey, you know what? Big yellow or retired, like, don't do anything. These are the things where you just like, you kind of update it when you get that kind of information. So, so I think it's a tool that you have, but you're not like in here every day doing it. That thing again where I can't.
So who inputs into this, you or you?
Yeah.
Each individual.
A project manager would do it. I'll do it. Sometimes I'll start it off if it's like the very beginning. Well, we're gonna have a client meeting in a couple of days. Like, let's make sure we cover this point of, hey, we're not ready yet for planning because we need to get the arborist or whatever it ends up being. So I can't switch to the next sheet. Oh, there we go. Do I just press?
Yeah, I think that
Okay.
should work.
Okay, cool. Next one is, I think I might have missed one. Hold on a second. Okay, that was good. So, so I'm not. But some of these spreadsheets are going to be kind of referring to that as well. Project task tracker, we call it. So and this IFC set. So we have a permit already approved, but we have a million details still that we need to kind of articulate through to get into the IFC set. So like we're tracking those based on kind of, I'll call them divisions, if you will, in a sense, lighting, windows and doors, certain specific details and miscellaneous details. But this is kind of where this is the dump. This is the dump. So like you were saying, how do you? So this is, we're still kind of, we've been doing this for about 8 months now, trying to get into this task tracker, trying to figure out how to do it. And I've been the one that's driven it because I want to have a place to go. Project manager loves it or needs it because they're more on top of it. But I do, and I think if you think of it from the perspective of if there's any like things that could have been missing or gone through the cracks that the right. So we're still articulating how best to use this, but these columns are nice because they kind of say like, okay, this is about schematic design, or this is about planning, or this is about coordination or project management, dealing with consultants and so on. And so I like it because sliding it all over to one side to complete it. So that you're like able to, I like to be able to look at things quickly to be like, okay, that's dealing with lighting. Don't need to worry about that for the next 2 weeks. Like I know that poor, and we have to figure out the openings of those windows, get that drawn, get it totality, and then be able to kind of zoom in on the thing that's really important. Always on the server, on the web, it's not like I gotta click on a folder, click on project management for that folder. It's like I just type in on the right, project name and the task tracker, and it pops up. So on the right is kind of how we do we call it a 1 week look ahead. So the way we do it is we have all of our projects lined up here. The first column just kind of has the team members that are involved. And so the first team member is more primary, the second team member will be in support. So I think we're going to commit to but it allows me, it forces me to say, if I do it, say, how many hours do we think it is versus what do we think it is? And yourself. Whatever, 640 hours roughly, it's like give or take 20% to you because they're had in the past where we just like dive into something and then I go to invoice. Oh my God, we just spent like way over time on the with our not to exceed fee. And it's just like a real bummer to kind of have that happen. And I'm sure it happens to all of us at some point. So if you can try to stay ahead of that, where it's like, hey, I'm looking at it from the beginning. Ideally, I'm looking at it mid-month.
Hours that you're spending on it and overtime, it's
And do it that way or do it afterwards. Here, this is the team member. And then this column is the hours for that week, right? So I'm asking them, how many hours do you think you're going to need this week to get? It's 5. And then I'll put in like 7.5, because every time someone says 5, it's like at least 1.5 times, if not twice as much. But I need to kind of balance that with kind of where we are. So everything kind of like sums up at the bottom, like to try to get to 40 there. 28 hours this week, but we only have 34 hours projected for the month. We got to talk about it, right? Maybe about this, or maybe we're getting ahead on something, and that's okay. But it's really about sort of evaluating it on a constant basis to kind of see, you know.
So each person for self-tracks, oh, I think I spent this much hours.
That's what I'm trying to get them to do. That's the whole thing, is like I'm trying to empower everyone to be as paranoid and worried about it as I am. Right?
So it's just that tracker, something that you created, or is it?
We've created as an office, it's a template that we've created through Smartsheet, you know, and it's evolved and it will evolve. And that's kind of the beauty of it. And that it's sort of like how you set up your BIM standards or whatever. It's like, I like it because it's a design problem. Like, how do we make this better for everyone to use? And it's like not a time suck. Because you don't want to spend time on the admin part. Yeah, you can spend time on the templating of it to get it right, but you know, and you're just constantly working with, but not spending time building it.
We have a question in chat. About the column checklist on the left of the current slide. Is that in Asana or Smartsheets?
That is in Smartsheets. Yeah. We use Asana as well. We used to use it office-wide and it didn't work. People just didn't like it or they didn't use it actively. I find that day and this day. And the nice thing about Asana is it's kind of like, it's the same kind of technique as the card view. I'll have 9 things I'm trying to do. No, I can't do all 9, you know, but I'll put the ones on the top that are the priority and I try to check through those. Get out of the month view. Maybe I'm pinging some owner's rep. It's like, okay, I'm not going to bother them every week. It's like, okay, I emailed them this month. I'll do a repeat for the next month. So those are just kinds of like the more day-to-day to make sure like, hey, I'm addressing these things, you know, because I have so many things that come in from staff, you know, it's like this and that, and, you know, I'll have to look at my calendar. But the Asana for me is just a way to basically kind of be able to way. So I think my point is that there's probably systems for the office and there may be systems for you individually, right? And I think that's great. And I still do that. And it here, so it. Did I? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Question. I think it's really admirable that you go through all the jobs that you've done and rate what's good, what's bad, what not to do. Is it this? Can you do the same thing with management systems?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I think you can probably do it if you just set up an evaluative tool. You know, I think it's the same thing. It's about asking the right questions. And so I think, you know, we've kind of done it more informally where we say, is this, you know, like we used to have the task tracker where it wasn't in card view. And then someone who's very knowledgeable about Smartsheet said, what about card view? And I said, oh, that's a great idea. And so a lot of it happens kind of iteratively and internally, as long as you're asking, is this working? Right? I think that's the important thing where you kind of, just like in design, you don't always accept something as good enough for what you've done. You say, how could it be better? And I think that sort of keeps pushing you to keep questioning and iterating it, just like you would, you know, a handrail detailer. Okay, so finally, like getting into kind of the managing the work in terms of like billing and fees. So about 3 years ago, I got tired of I had a bookkeeper and then an accountant. I was like, the invoicing was kind of, I had some kind of time tracker and it was a lot of work, you know, trying to like take all that time and figure out how to put in how it came about, but someone approached us, and this is a company called BQE Core. And he said, okay, we can kind of like begin to sort of integrate some of these systems. And I said, okay, let's give it a try. And so we started doing it, and there was a lot of legwork on my part to kind of just like build it up, and it still is, because it's a little bit like BIM. But we're getting a little closer in that what I wanted something where all our time could be tracked. All that time tracking could be done directly into invoicing. And with Core, it's nice because if you are over on your hours, there's a really nice algorithm to be able to kind of like redistribute things in a way where it says, yep, I can only charge $9,000. It's like, I don't have to like futz around saying this person worked 0 hours or this or whatever. And it actually saves a ton of time where you're just like, I know what my goal is, I can get there. So all our invoicing is done through that. So basically, like, let's say we worked, 100 hours that month, but we can only charge for 84 of them or something, because we do often do an hourly not to exceed on a lot of our contracts. So I can basically do a net bill and say, look, I'm charging whatever, 9,500, and then it'll go through, and what it does is on
percentage.
is to show to the client, we worked a ton on your project, and we actually give kind of a detail of the time that we spend, because we have set it up as an hourly not to exceed on purpose, because we feel that if we spend less time, it benefits the client. And that way we're just able to kind of work more quickly to do that, like especially with commercial clients, we have fixed fee. About how to present that. When I have to like, do I spend 45 minutes thinking about that, or?
Does your office use Microsoft products like Outlook or Teams? If not, are you using Google software?
Microsoft Outlook for email and our calendars. We use Zoom for all our communication. We don't use Teams because we can't annotate on Teams, and we have a lot of remote work. So, and then we mostly and that's another point, like reducing all the software you use is kind of a nice thing. This slide, which maybe not everyone can see. So more to get here. And so what it does, right, it shows your cost, right? So your cost is basically based on labor hours. So we've calculated each individual's labor hours, based on their salary, and then we have an over. Andrew's working 5 hours on the project. It's like with that multiplier, we're assuming that every hour. So for that last month. And that helps me also helps me evaluate. And that's been something we struggled with and didn't know about. Like, hey, are we doing okay on this project? Or are we like, based on the amount of hours? And that has just been beneficial to have a snapshot to be like, hey, we're burning a ton of time on this project. We've got to be aware, or this project is going great. To that project, that you can put a range in there and look at it and do different reports and that sort of thing. What's nice is it's kind of this dashboard that you can kind of look at how you're doing. And my goal is to really be looking at that mid-month and asking our staff to make sure their time is in, because the time is all on this software. And, being able to kind of look at that. Okay, how are we landing right now? We're not there yet. To be able to be doing that on a more regular basis and empower the kind of the higher managerial staff. And then we're 5, like we kind of have people that are really more senior, and like having them kind of be able to look at this, and be able to say, how am I doing with this relative to it? Because fundamentally, I always believe that whether you're going to run your own firm or not, you're running projects, and you have to think about all of this criteria to run a successful project and ultimately your own firm. And I feel like for people from the very beginning, when they start working, they should know about what our fees are for this project, how much time they're putting in it, so they can really understand the whole process, in that way. So that these 3 components, like how do you secure the work, how do you manage the work, how do you manage the firm, or something that they're thinking about more often, as opposed to just the second one, which is managing the work. Like a lot of times it's like, hey, we just want you to do the work, we'll figure out the proposals and so on. Like all of our proposals are on the server. You can see what the fees are and that we're charging and that sort of thing. And we talk about it and you say, yeah, this is a low fee project that we took on because of the quality of the project. We loved it, but it wasn't a huge fee. And so we'll talk about it in the weekly meetings and say, hey, this, we got to be careful on the fee. What drawings do we need to do to get there, so we're not pushing ourselves over. And that's kind of like this final slide. It's like, how do you share those responsibilities with your staff? If you're one person, that's tough, but you can just parse it out over time, thinking about, when am I going to do this? Am I going to do this mid-month? Set up a schedule, that sort of thing. So you're evaluating it in a way that's systematic, right? You don't want to be like 2-3 months late on these things and find out you're behind. And then just empowering your staff to think about those things and being involved in that and working on the spreadsheet or whatever it is we got there. Schedule it in advance, the hours, you intend to allocate. So it's like, think about like, how much time am I spending on business development? I had someone tell me like, you got to spend 20 hours a week, sorry. 20 hours a month, sorry. And I was like, wow, 20 hours a month into that. But you can just ask yourself, where am I relative to whatever goal you think is ideal? And seeing it. And then finally, just thinking of it as a design problem, right? Thinking of it as a process that's iterative. There's no absolute right or wrong way to do it per se, because everyone has their own workflow and like sees things and does things differently. But see it as a means and methods of discovering like who you are and what your office is and how that jives with the kind of work you do and that sort of thing, right? If you're doing a lot of fast-paced work, you might have to set up a different system than if it's a 5-year-long, really complex residential project. And so I think those are just, again, important questions to ask to get to the right model for you. That's all.
How many people are in your virtual office?
So we have 3 of us are full-time in the office, and then we have 2 who are remote. One of whom had worked with us for 5 years, and then relocated during the pandemic, but we've been able to keep that system working even though it's remote, and do work. For a long time, we're doing less work for that one client that we did a lot of work over the country, but it kind of opened the door for us to be able to have a remote worker and working on something here and just allow that to be normal. So we work in office the best, person to person. That's just how I prefer it, and like how I think we work best. And the folks that are in the office do like to come in because I think it's just a little bit more, collegial and collaborative.
Question from chat. Does your office use Slack or any other sort of chat or messaging program?
We use Slack. Yes. So we use Slack. I can't say I love Slack for every reason, but it is really good. My only advice with Slack is if you're, the head of the firm or whatever, sometimes you just kind of have to you can't always think of everything as a fire you're trying to put out, or you can't do any of the thoughtful things we've talked about. Like, that's just really, really hard. So, but Slack has been a great tool, especially for anyone who's remote.
Yeah, in our case, we use WhatsApp, actually, I actually stay out of it, so I have them they have their own WhatsApp group. And if they can't figure it out on their own,
Yeah.
they can contact me, so I just, not.
Same, we basically, it used to be, I was like slacked on everything. I was like, nope. Keep, make sure you do the @ whoever it is, so I don't always see it, and like then come to me. So like it's a learning process because it's a new tool. But we had when we first started working for that startup, they wanted us to be on their Slack channel back in 2016. And I said, I'd never heard of Slack. I was like, okay, we'll take a look at it. And then one of the younger members of the office kind of knew about it. And I was like, okay, well, why don't you be the primary person for it? And all of a sudden there's like Slacks at 2 a.m. and this and that. I was like, okay, we're going to shut the whole thing down. Like, that's not a productive client architect communication platform.
Well, I mean, Slack, email and things, but how do you control the liability issues if you okay, you take over Slack and you're in terms of communications and things, and they may say, we're experts at blah blah blah, and the lawyers will say, well, you're an expert, and therefore you're liable because you didn't perform. So how do you control that message?
You mean in terms of Slack?
Yeah, or in terms of any messaging.
And with the client.
With your subordinates.
Oh.
Do you kind of educate them about appropriate language in terms of communication? Maybe that's something you should do. I was just looking at an architect's website, and they do a lot of hospitality work, right?
Yeah.
And they're saying, my lawyer says, never use the term expert.
Oh, sure. Oh, I
There we
see.
are, experts at blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh, wow. But, words right there.
Wait, but they're communicating with each other or with
No,
with the
that's not the
clients?
website. Right, and they're,
Oh, I see. Yeah, I mean, we're an office that cares a lot about words. So we're pretty careful. I mean, there's clearly the liability thing, which is that's you've become an architect, you've had to go through the sort of like calling up a wood manufacturer, like, I'm a designer, like you can't say you're an architect. So you kind of go through that where you kind of learn, but I mean, I think, maybe it's not answering your question, but I think like how people communicate is really important, right? So I think that's why, like, even with Slack, it's like, how it can be a good tool for us or a bad tool? How should you communicate? Is it about quick things, or is it about a more complex question? And do you say, here's what I'm thinking on this, give me a call tomorrow, or like, let's talk about it tomorrow. Like, indicating what the urgency is, I think, is really important for the person on the other end. So it's like, oh, do I interrupt my flow, or do I kind of need to address this? They text me when it's a problem. Usually.
I wanted to ask you this, how you, are you still real hands-on, like with all the beautiful wood things you do, or do you have to spend part of your time in the shop?
Well, okay, I'm sort of working that part out. I'm trying to figure out how to make that happen. So it kind of comes and goes, the amount of time or whatever it is to spend on that stuff. So I like to, and that's, I guess, one of the goals is to make time for that. I guess this year I spent time actually sort of rebuilding shed in my backyard into a workshop kind of thing. And, I hired a contractor that I'm friends with, and actually that we did it together, the venting stuff, right? So we already have this kind of working together kind of thing, but in the end, basically, I don't have time to be building the thing myself. So, he mostly did it, but then I would go 1 day a week or half a day or whatever it is. Or this or that, or experiment with wood, or and that actually is helpful because that's part of the process. We came up with the state, the thing turned out to be rotted, and we use the rafters, but it's like by doing it, then I also get some ideas. But then of course there's months on end of where I actually have some little side thing going on.
To me, like, it's one thing to think something,
Yeah.
it's another thing to execute it.
Yeah. So anyway, try, it didn't necessarily, or, you know, or maybe, I mean, actually, the medical thing that happened during the Great Recession, right? But it wasn't worse. I think everyone got that. I know what's this thing, right? I mean, I was asked to do an art piece for the thing. All right, sure, I'll do that.
Even like even making models, we used to make a lot more models, you know, in the early days of the firm, and I think that's maybe because we were less busy or the pace of the projects was a little bit slower, that kind of thing. And I think like obviously during the pandemic, none of that happened really, and then so we're, you know, I think it's still, you know, we talk about creating all these systems and that sort of thing, but there's always kind of this reality check that we have to have. It's like, well, okay, we're building this BIM model, but like still building a physical model teaches you a lot about, you know, the sensorial aspects of it that you don't get. And so, you know, even on the kind of management of the office, like what is the kind of counterpoint to, like, you know, I feel like I'm presenting just this very integrated sort of approach, but at the same time, there's a chaos there. And you know, and I think you just have to acknowledge that. And that sometimes you sort of have to, you know, take a step back from it and say like, okay, how do I evaluate if this is really working or not? I mean, it all seem great, and I've got all these numbers in front of me and so on, but you know, if I'm pursuing the wrong projects, full stop, it's like, you're not going to get where you need to be, you know, if you're not happy with it or that kind of thing.
Well, and the copper mahogany leasing, I mean, that was like maybe in the pandemic, you know, I had two kids, one ages 1 and 3 at home with a shelter at home thing, and I'm trying to do whatever work, you know, basically going kind of insane.
Yeah.
And I was like, all right, well, what can I do in like discrete short amounts of time in a limited square feet of space, right? So I had like a space like this, and I would do like 20 minutes at a time. Like, it was scan this piece of wood today. All right, tomorrow I'm gonna like it was like actually very, very reduced. And you know, the other thing that we need to talk about later in the day.
The question related to all that, so you started with 3 things that you have to do, but you can't do all 3 of those. Secure the work, manage the firm. And then you're adding 20% of kind of luxury research and like that. And so you just described a mechanics of all this. So how do you find partners or delegate or find trusted people to take on those works, because it's real?
Yeah. Well, I think you just you invest in people. I think that's really the goal. And it's like if you're getting into this profession, you're getting into it because, you know, you've obviously, you know, achieved certain standards, but you're curious, right? And you know, we try to find the most, you know, intellectually curious people who like to do the work, you know, like it's about, for our office, I mean, the tough balance is that more senior people are still doing the drawings, right? Because we're so small, and that's purposeful, right? It's like, would I prefer to be doing drawings versus some of these things? Absolutely. I mean, that's where it's where I discover things and find things. And as I sort of look at it, I'm like, okay, how do I, in your case, like in 20 minutes, how do I discover something, right? As opposed to I don't have 2 hours. So I really think it's investing in the people, and even, you know, not assuming just because they're 1 year out of school that they're not capable of addressing some of these things, because how many examples do we have of really successful 31-year-old architects? You know, I mean, look at the, you know, Metropolitan Museum of Art, what she's about to do with her level of experience is just amazing. So I think it's really about investing in people and empowering them to try to help do the work.
Is it all the people, or do you find that more long-term, kind of right hand person?
There's certain appropriateness for certain people. But for example, you know, for someone just starting out, I'll ask them like how many hours they think they're going to spend on that drawing, right? Like I know I was never asked that when I started, like never asked to think about what it would take to do something. I didn't know, but I wasn't thinking about what it was. So that's kind of where that week look ahead thing, like we talk about projects, but then we also talk about marketing and awards and business development. And so I'm always bringing up, hey, these are a couple of projects that we're talking to and this sort of thing. So the most junior person in the office will be like, hey, what's going on with that one client you were talking to about a project? Because they're curious. And, I'll just try to find ways to get them involved in some of those other things. So maybe in the span of a year or two, they're able to take on more, and really contribute. So.
I would say actually, so the spreadsheet that I have that lists the people and their tasks on priority, that, in some cases I have another version of it that has another column with hours that go with it and do some things. And I would say that the other part of it, I think it's also a personality type. So, which maybe has like not that much to do with what they're at, right? So actually some of my younger people, they have this like personality type of like, they're really good at like prepping the things, crafts or whatever. And others, they're more advanced in other ways, but that's actually your brain just doesn't work out. You try to take advantage of each person's personality.
When you're thinking about, I don't know if I've got a question, more like maybe a comment or just opening up to discussion. I think it's the case that most of the people in SFF are sole practitioners and may not have any plans to grow data-wise. So both of you guys are, a little bit not, within that kind of community. And so, this has been great, so much great like information and insight here. And I'm just trying to figure out how to translate it into something that, probably a lot of people who are still on the Zoom call, they're all sitting in that mode of like, I'm one person in a room. So you're not really thinking about like the HR management, how do you take advantage of this person's skill set or that person's skill set, or like, how do you think about that person's professional development? It's really just about how do I keep on top of everything myself? And one of the things that I constantly struggle with as kind of a Luddite is how much stuff do I want to put into the computer versus literally just have it on a piece of paper? And I'm wondering what you guys think about that. Obviously both of you started out as a sole person and maybe quickly started taking on staff like on a contract basis or as employees, but I've dabbled in all these different systems, something like Asana, blah, blah, blah. And I feel like I don't have the bandwidth as one person to learn another program. I'm just gonna like do it on paper. And like my sacrifice, like I can't search for this term like from 6 months ago. So be it.
Yeah.
And I wonder what you guys think about that. I wonder what.
Well, yeah, I could have done what you did, right? I mean, Google Sheets is pretty simple. It's just like, it's just a very simple program.
Right.
It's like transfer those little look-at things onto the page, so that they're all there and and then for the 6 months ago, actually, one of the advice things from the book is that numbering your pages, you want to index, it's just like regular dictionary, right?
Yeah.
But then I can find the thing,
Yeah.
I can find the thing for like a meeting a year ago.
Yeah.
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 I just, some of the stuff that Alex you're showing looks great and very, very tantalizing to me, but like, again, as a sole practitioner, like, that's like more firepower than I need. Like, what am I gonna be doing? Analyzing, like my own time, like, I spent 15 minutes too much on this thing over here.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of what I've constantly been on the search for is what's the sweet spot of technology versus just literally having a pencil and a piece of paper in front of me. And as if I scale up, I'm gonna have this person working for me for like 20 hours a week or something, okay, then that starts bringing in a little bit of these issues, like how do you track what we're doing, and how do you like look back over the last month and see, well, that didn't come out the way I thought it was gonna come out, I've got to adjust this way.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's the kind of stuff that's constantly kind of like, I've been on the precipice of hiring someone for years because I'm like, oh, this is way too much. I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I was there, and I think the question always came up, how do I get help, or what do I need help on? Because like I did everything, down to like doing my bookkeeping on Christmas Eve. That's when I was like, I can't keep doing this because I did everything. And so I think it's a question of whether it's somebody that helps you, like as a contract type of thing, where they're that, we've always kind of debated about like with business development and that kind of thing. Like I have kids, like I don't have time to run all over and do all that stuff. And, so we've like debated that and debated it for getting published and that sort of thing. And we've dabbled in it, but like in the end, it was like just too expensive for the return on investment for our small firm like this, and I think you're saying the same thing. It's like, different scales, but it's like, how do you do that? I think really the question is what we were talking about. Analyze it, be like, okay, I'm doing this on paper and do it for a while. And you say like, how's this working for me? And then like invest a set amount of time on a trial, right? On something. Smartsheets is great because it's basically Excel, right? Like you're not learning a new piece of software. It's super straightforward. Like it's just, everything's the same. It's just a little better. It's a little easier. So that's why I love it, because I was tired of Excel and other people are like, oh, I just get kind of mired in Excel. So I think they were smart about just simplifying things in a way that was just universally used. So that's why I promoted it here, because I thought it's a really great tool. Is it the cheapest thing? Not necessarily. I mean, it obviously is way better if you're like, sharing things to massive project teams. But I've always sort of felt like with my experience and working for other firms that it's always best to design your firm to be doing more complex work, to be able to handle it. Like, how do you set up your server structure, for example? Like, so when I set up the server structure when I first started, I modeled it after the last firm I worked for that did skyscrapers. It's just like, oh, we have a curtain wall consultant and all that stuff was in our server structure because I said, you never know. You never know. Because it's a lot easier to kind of put it there than to be like, oh my gosh, like we never had submittals because we always worked with a contractor. We just did it on site. So I kind of feel like it's always best to organize more complex than you need, so that if you get that project you really want, you're able to kind of, or if you have to hire, but it always has to be on the balance, right? Of that return on investment and like where you feel friction. Like when you're starting to really feel friction on something, like I did on Christmas Eve, I said, I need to get a bookkeeper. Yeah. 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 And I just, at first it was like, I can't believe I'm paying this, but then.
I think with the small firm, this has saved my butt several times. When you have a to-do list with these things at the top have to get done, but your motivation and rather than pushing them for another day, get together with somebody and maybe let them do a few days worth of work with you or brainstorming. It's helped me break the flood dam that stops me from doing this one thing because my brain is frozen on that.
It's you bring up a great point. I think for sole practitioners is like reaching out to others, right? We, with a firm of 5 people, we have a tiny community, but I always find whenever we meet up with other firms or, have these kinds of discussions, how valuable they really are and like how it kind of resets and refreshes you to think about possibilities and how what felt like an overwhelming problem may not be insurmountable because someone's dealt with it or they're dealing with it and you can talk about it. So I think that's really, really key.
To me, that's the one thing that I missed most during the pandemic was virtual stuff, because this is the way you get to know people and have a feeling for your camaraderie about certain things.
Yeah.
And I truly hope that we will have more and more physical presence here, over the next months. Because that to me is it's what's benefited me the most with small practitioners having touchstone of people around you.
Yeah, and the regularity of it, right? The regularity of connecting, asking these questions, both within a forum of people, but also on your own, right? Like it's like that's the kind of thing. And then you're like, when you hit up against an impasse, talking to someone about it. How do you do it? You know, how does it work for you?
The last time I was here in person, I got snagged into doing a 10-week volunteer.
I just, I just want to interject real quick. Sorry. It's Rachel. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Mhm.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just wanted to say before we close that next month we are skipping a month because of the convention. So just so everybody knows. And then in July, we'll reconvene with the Wildland Urban Interface panel.
Yeah, that's important that we will not meet next month, the second Thursday, but in June. July.
Okay.
So actually, one announcement I'll make is that I'm actually preparing one of these programs for the San Francisco version of this. It will be next Thursday, and Elizabeth Orr is going to be speaking. She's a business consultant, and answer similar kind of topic, but from someone who's professionally is advice or interested that we will be able to.
Can people, if there are people who are interested in that, how do they have to register or how do they?
You don't have to register. I mean, I'll be sending out a Zoom link. I guess also I can send it out to the East Bay group as well. I guess the East Bay group,
See.
the one that the Christian.
Oh.
Maybe I don't know where. I had said normally I send it to the San Francisco email list and also Christian group, but they're not. The East Bay.
It's not the same thing.
Not the same thing. So I don't know if there's another.
Another way that, what's that?
Yeah. That's right. So that, yeah, Ronald runs and some of that is on.
Oh, yeah, I definitely, well, depending on. I don't remember when Donald was back, but I will either do it or have done.
If I could send you the announcement.
And speaking of, we actually have an event with Elizabeth Sporer next week as well. So I figured this is a good time as any to pitch that. It's going to be a webinar Tuesday at noon, and it's on profit motive and business of design. So it's kind of a 101 in firm financial management. It's part of our professional practice committee.
Well, I want to thank Enos and Alex and Andrew for putting together a great program today.
Yeah, thank you guys.